"You're like a brother to me, Caleb." She said it so often I almost believed it. "My name is Caleb Bennett. I'm 32, a fire suppression inspector in Chicago. For 4 years, I've checked sprinkler systems and emergency exits in federal buildings. I thought precision and kindness were enough to keep my life safe." Then I gave Brianna Vance my spare apartment key. She said she worried about emergencies. That was the biggest mistake of my life. 10 months later, I'm 40 feet up on a hydraulic lift at the Dirksen Federal Building, a courthouse with federal offices. The lobby below is full of lawyers, clerks, people waiting for hearings. That's when security starts dragging someone out. It's Brianna, screaming, "There's a family emergency. I'm his sister." My foreman stares up at me. The lawyers stop talking. A judge in robes turns and walks away. "She's not my sister." I yell, but my voice cracks and nobody's listening anymore. They escort her out, and she drops something, a printout. A list of 911 calls. Dozens of them, all from my home phone number, each one circled in red. That's when I realized what she'd been doing. She had my spare key. She'd been in my apartment using my landline to make fake emergency calls while I was at work. She stole my Medicare information and filed thousands of dollars in fraudulent claims. She copied my social security card and built an entire identity theft case with me as the criminal. 3 days later, I'm in handcuffs. The detective says, "Someone's been making prank 911 calls from your apartment. They think it's me." After everything I gave her, my trust, my friendship, my key, what's going to happen to me now? What she did next? She tried to bury me. What I did next made her regret every single lie. Before we go any further, please hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you give this a like, good luck is coming your way. The rain started just after 6, the kind of steady Chicago drizzle that turned the streetlights into soft halos and made the pavement gleam like polished stone. Caleb Bennett stood at his kitchen counter, the rhythm of the water against the window a backdrop to the small, methodical ritual he performed every Sunday evening. He was 32 years old, precise in his habits, and tonight that precision felt like the only thing holding his world in place. The pill organizer sat open in front of him, 7 plastic compartments labeled Monday through Sunday. He pressed 2 white tablets into Monday's slot, anti-inflammatories for the dull ache that had lived in his lower back since last June, when he'd helped Brianna move a sectional sofa up 3 flights of stairs. The memory surfaced unbidden, her laughter echoing in the stairwell. The way she'd called him, my hero, when they finally wrestled the thing through her doorway. He'd felt useful then, needed. The pain in his spine had seemed like a fair trade. Caleb filled Tuesday's slot, then Wednesday's, his fingers working with the muscle memory of a man who'd done this too many times to count. The apartment around him was quiet except for the rain and the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt 4 stories below. He'd lived here for 3 years, ever since taking the position as a fire suppression inspector with the city's federal building division. The place suited him: clean lines, neutral colors, everything in its designated spot. His work boots sat by the door, still carrying the faint smell of concrete dust and machine oil from Friday's inspection at the post office on Van Buren. His jacket hung on the same hook every night, his inspection reports filed in alphabetical order in the desk drawer. The kitchen light hummed softly overhead, that particular fluorescent buzz that most people tuned out but that Caleb always noticed. He'd spent 4 years learning to notice everything: the placement of fire extinguishers, the age of smoke detector batteries, the pressure readings on sprinkler systems. It was a job that demanded attention to detail, and he was good at it. His supervisor had told him so just last month during his annual review. "You're one of the most thorough inspectors we've got, Bennett. The kind of guy who actually reads the whole manual." He was reaching for Thursday's pills when he noticed the envelope on the edge of the counter, half buried beneath a stack of grocery store coupons he'd been meaning to throw away for 2 weeks. Medicare. Explanation of benefits. The envelope was that particular shade of bureaucratic beige that made his stomach tighten even before he knew what was inside. He hadn't opened it yet, hadn't wanted to, really, because medical paperwork always felt like opening a box that might contain bad news. But something about the weight of it, the official blue ink of the return address, pulled his attention. Caleb set down the pill bottle and picked up the envelope, tearing it open with his thumb. The paper inside was crisp, divided into neat columns of dates and charges and codes that meant nothing to him at first glance. He scanned the page, his eyes moving methodically from left to right the way they did when he checked a building's fire suppression manifest. Date of service, provider name, amount billed, amount approved. The language was sterile, impersonal, the kind of bureaucratic shorthand designed to obscure rather than clarify. Then he stopped. There, halfway down the page, was a charge for a service he didn't recognize. A consultation at a clinic on the South Side. Ashland Medical Associates, dated 3 weeks ago, September 23. He'd never been to that clinic. Hadn't even heard of it. The amount was modest, just under $200, but the fact of it sat in his chest like a stone. He read the line again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. September 23. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back through his calendar. That had been a Tuesday. He'd been at the federal courthouse all afternoon, inspecting the emergency lighting system on the 8th floor. He had the sign-in sheet to prove it, his signature in his own handwriting next to the timestamp 1:47 p.m. There was no way he could have been at a clinic on the South Side at the same time. "I'm just being paranoid," he whispered to the empty room. His voice sounded thin, unconvincing even to himself. Maybe it was a billing error. They happened all the time. Insurance companies mixed up patient names, transposed numbers, sent statements to the wrong address. He'd call them in the morning and straighten it out. The phone buzzed on the counter, a sharp vibration that made him flinch. He glanced at the screen. Brianna. The text was short, the kind of message that could sound casual or cutting depending on how you read it. "You didn't answer my call. Are you really doing this?" Caleb stared at the words, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He hadn't answered her call because he'd been at work, 40 feet up on a hydraulic lift inspecting a sprinkler line at the federal courthouse. He'd seen her name flash across the screen and let it go to voicemail, the same way he'd done twice the day before. It wasn't intentional, exactly. He just needed space to think, to breathe without her voice in his ear. Asking him where he was, what he was doing, why he hadn't texted her back within the hour. But the way she phrased it, "Are you really doing this?" made it sound like he was committing some unforgivable act. Like not answering her calls was a betrayal of the invisible contract she'd drawn up without his signature. He could hear her voice in his head, that particular tone she used when she felt slighted. Hurt mixed with accusation, wrapped in a layer of disbelief that he could be so thoughtless. They'd met 10 months ago at a community fundraiser for the fire department. She'd approached him at the buffet table, bright and confident, asking him about his work with genuine interest. Or what had seemed like genuine interest at the time. She was a pharmaceutical marketing manager, smart and quick-witted, and she'd made him laugh in a way he hadn't in months. Within 2 weeks, she was calling him brother, telling people they were basically family. It had felt warm at first, that instant intimacy. Like he'd been adopted into something he didn't know he was missing. Now it felt like a caller. He didn't reply to the text. Instead, he set the phone face down on the counter and slid it into the drawer next to the sink, out of sight. The small act felt rebellious and childish at the same time, like hiding vegetables under a napkin when you were 8 years old. But the silence that followed felt like relief. Caleb turned his attention back to the pill organizer, finishing the week's worth of medications with the same careful precision he brought to every task. When he was done, he closed the lid with a soft click and set it on the shelf next to the coffee maker. The Medicare statement still lay on the counter, accusing him with its tidy columns. He folded it once, twice, and tucked it into his pocket. He'd look into it tomorrow. Maybe it was nothing. Mistakes happened all the time. The rain picked up, drumming harder against the glass, a sound like fingertips tapping impatiently on wood. Caleb walked to the refrigerator to pull out leftovers for dinner, and as he opened the door, his eyes caught on the photo stuck to the front with a magnet shaped like the Chicago skyline. It was from last summer, a group shot taken at a friend's barbecue in Lincoln Park. He was standing next to Brianna, her arm looped through his, her smile wide and easy. She'd insisted on being in the picture, insisted on standing close, insisted on calling him my brother, when she introduced him to people he didn't know. In the dim light of the kitchen, her face in the photo seemed to watch him, her eyes following him as he moved. It was a trick of the angle, a shadow cast by the overhead bulb, but it made the hair on the back of his neck prickle. He remembered how she'd shown up to that barbecue even though she hadn't been invited, carrying a casserole dish like a passport that granted her entry. How she'd touched his arm every time she laughed, marking territory in a way that made his friends exchange glances he pretended not to see. Caleb shut the refrigerator door harder than he meant to. The photo fluttered slightly, then settled. He stood there for a moment, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of the folded paper in his pocket and the silence of the phone hidden in the drawer. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Sunday evening rhythm, distant sirens, the rumble of the L train. 2 blocks over, the muted voices of neighbors passing in the hallway. Someone was cooking garlic bread. The smell drifted through the building's old ventilation system, warm and ordinary. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. But somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the careful order of his life, a small crack had opened. The Medicare statement with its impossible charge. The text message with its loaded question. The photograph with its watchful eyes. Separately, they were nothing, minor irritations, easily explained. Together, they formed a pattern he couldn't quite see yet, like the first thin lines in a windshield before it shatters. Caleb pulled a container of leftover pasta from the refrigerator and set it on the counter. His hands were steady as he peeled back the lid and spooned the food onto a plate. Steady as he placed it in the microwave and set the timer. Steady as he reached for a fork from the drawer. But when the microwave beeped and he reached for the plate, he noticed his reflection in the dark window above the sink. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting his features, making him look like someone he didn't quite recognize. He looked tired, older than 32, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for longer than he realized. The apartment felt suddenly too quiet, the silence pressing in from all sides. Caleb ate his dinner standing at the counter, tasting nothing, his mind circling back to that single line on the Medicare statement. Ashland Medical Associates. September 23, $200 for a service he never received. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the streets clean and leaving everything gleaming and cold. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor polish, a scent that Caleb had come to associate with the particular bureaucracy of government buildings. It was Tuesday morning, and he stood in the lobby of the Richard J. Daley Center, his inspection clipboard tucked under one arm, his work badge clipped to his belt. He'd been here a dozen times over the past 2 years, checking fire suppression systems and emergency exits, and the security guards knew him by name now. "Morning, Bennett," the guard at the metal detector said, waving him through without making him empty his pockets. "Morning, Carlos." The elevator took him to the 3rd floor, where the family law division occupied a warren of courtrooms and waiting areas. He wasn't here for an inspection today. His appointment wasn't until Thursday. He was here because he'd finally worked up the nerve to do something he'd been putting off for 3 months. Contest a parking ticket that he was certain had been issued in error. The ticket claimed he'd parked in a loading zone on State Street on a Saturday in July. He'd been at a training seminar in Milwaukee that entire weekend. He had the hotel receipt to prove it. The clerk's office was crowded, people waiting on hard plastic chairs that were bolted to the floor in rows. Caleb took a number from the dispenser and found a seat near the back, settling in for what he knew would be a long wait. He pulled out his phone to check his work email, scrolling through inspection schedules and safety bulletins, when he heard a voice from the front of the room. "Number 47? A woman stood at the counter, her back to him, holding a stack of manila folders that looked ready to topple. She wore a gray blazer over a white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Something about the way she stood straight-backed, composed, like she'd done this 1,000 times, made Caleb glance up from his phone. "I need to file an emergency motion for a protective order," she was saying to the clerk. "The respondent violated the existing order last night. Called my client 16 times from a blocked number." The clerk, a tired-looking man in his 50s, barely looked up. "You'll need to fill out Form DV-200 and have it notarized." "I have Form DV-200. Right here. Notarized yesterday." She slid a document across the counter with the kind of patience that suggested she was used to dealing with bureaucratic inertia. The clerk took the form, examined it, then sighed. "You're missing the affidavit of service. The affidavit is attached." Page 3. There was a pause. The clerk flipped through the pages, found what he was looking for, and nodded grudgingly. I'll need to see ID. The woman pulled out her driver's license without hesitation. Caleb found himself watching the exchange, impressed by her calm efficiency. Most people who came through here looked frazzled, overwhelmed by the maze of paperwork and procedure. She looked like she'd built the maze herself and knew every shortcut. When she finished at the counter, she turned and their eyes met for just a moment. She had a face that was striking rather than pretty strong features, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She gave him a brief, professional smile, the kind you give a stranger in an elevator, and walked past him toward the door. Caleb's number was called 20 minutes later. He approached the counter, explained his situation, and handed over his documentation. The process was surprisingly quick. The clerk looked at his hotel receipt, cross-referenced it with the ticket date, and stamped a form that would send the case to a hearing officer for dismissal. You'll get a confirmation in the mail in 2 weeks, the clerk said. Caleb thanked him and turned to leave, feeling a small sense of victory. It was a minor thing, a parking ticket, but there was something satisfying about proving he'd been right. About having the documentation to back up his version of events. He was halfway to the elevator when he heard footsteps behind him. Excuse me? He turned. It was the woman from the clerk's office, the one with the folders. She'd caught up to him in the hallway, slightly out of breath. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, but I couldn't help overhearing you're a fire inspector. Caleb glanced down at his badge, which was still clipped to his belt. Yeah, fire suppression systems, mostly. Federal buildings. Maya Sterling. She extended her hand. I'm a paralegal. I work with a firm that handles a lot of premises liability cases. Slip and falls, building code violations, that kind of thing. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, confident. I've got a case right now, she continued, where a client was injured in a building fire. The sprinkler system didn't activate. We're trying to establish negligence, but the landlord's lawyers are claiming the system was up to code. I know this is completely random, but would you be willing to look at some inspection records? Just give me your professional opinion? I can pay your standard consulting rate. Caleb hesitated. He didn't usually take outside work. His job with the city kept him busy. Enough, but something about the directness of her request, the lack of small talk or manipulation, made him want to help. I'd have to check if there's a conflict of interest, he said. If it's a city building, I probably can't consult on it. But if it's private property, I could take a look. It's a private apartment complex in Pilsen. 4 units, built in the 90s. Then yeah, I could probably help. Do you have a card? She pulled one from her blazer pocket and handed it to him. Maya Sterling, paralegal, Whitman and Associates. Her email and office number were printed in a clean sans serif font. Thank you, she said. Really, I've been trying to find an expert witness for 2 months and everyone's either too expensive or too busy. I haven't agreed to be a witness yet, Caleb said, smiling slightly. Let me look at the records first. Fair enough. They stood there for a moment, the courthouse noise humming around them, footsteps on marble. The distant sound of a judge's gavel, the low murmur of people waiting for justice or mercy or just to be heard. Maya shifted the folders in her arms, and Caleb noticed a coffee stain on the edge of one of them, a small imperfection in an otherwise immaculate presentation. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. That parking ticket, did you actually win? Caleb laughed. I think so. They're sending it to a hearing officer, but I've got a hotel receipt that proves I was 200 miles away when they claim I was parked illegally. Good for you. Most people just pay the fine, even when they're right. It's easier than fighting. Yeah, well, I don't like being accused of something I didn't do. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition, like she understood exactly what he meant. Neither do I, she said quietly. They exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hallway toward the stairs. Caleb stood there for a moment, her business card in his hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction, exactly, though there was that too. It was more like recognition. Like he'd met someone who operated on the same frequency he did, clear, direct, no games. He slipped the card into his wallet and headed for the elevator. Already thinking about how he'd explain to his supervisor that he was taking on a consulting project. The rest of the week passed in the usual rhythm of inspections and paperwork. On Wednesday, he checked the fire alarm system at a post office on the north side. On Thursday, he spent 4 hours at the Daily Center testing emergency lighting. On Friday, he drove out to O'Hare to inspect the sprinkler system in a federal office building near the airport. He didn't text Brianna. She texted him twice, once to ask if he wanted to get dinner, once to tell him about a sale at Target, but he didn't respond. It wasn't a conscious decision, exactly. He just found himself unwilling to engage, unwilling to step back into the pattern of constant contact and manufactured urgency. Saturday afternoon, he got a call from his friend Marcus, inviting him to a barbecue. "Just a few people," Marcus said. "Burgers, beers, nothing fancy. Bring that friend of yours if you want." "Brianna, right?" Caleb's stomach tightened. "I wasn't planning on bringing anyone." Cool. Just thought I'd offer. "See you at 4? "Yeah, see you then." Marcus lived in a 3-flat in Logan Square, and the barbecue was set up in the small backyard, a patch of grass barely big enough for a grill and a folding table. When Caleb arrived, there were already a dozen people there, most of them friends from the fire department or Marcus's girlfriend's social circle. The air smelled like charcoal and grilled onions, and someone had set up a Bluetooth speaker that was playing old Motown hits. Caleb grabbed a beer from the cooler and settled into an easy conversation with a guy named Deshaun, who worked in the fire marshal's office. They were talking about a recent code change when Caleb heard a familiar voice behind him. "There you are." He turned. Brianna was standing at the gate, holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. She wore a sundress and oversized sunglasses, her smile bright and unshakable. Marcus was beside her, looking slightly confused. "Brianna, hey," Marcus said. "I didn't know you were coming." "Oh, I texted Caleb earlier," she said breezily, walking past him into the yard. He must have forgotten to mention it. Caleb's jaw tightened. He hadn't forgotten. She hadn't texted him about the barbecue at all. He pulled out his phone and checked nothing. No message. No mention of Marcus or Saturday or anything. She crossed the yard toward him, setting the casserole dish on the table with a theatrical flourish. "I made my famous 7-layer dip," she announced to no one in particular. Caleb can't get enough of it. He'd eaten it once, at a party 6 months ago, and had told her it was good because that's what you say when someone brings food. Now it had become his favorite, a story she told people to reinforce the narrative that they were close, that she knew him better than anyone. Brianna looped her arm through his, leaning in close. "You didn't answer my texts this week," she said, her voice low but edged with something that wasn't quite hurt and wasn't quite anger. "I was starting to think you were mad at me." "I've been busy," Caleb said, gently trying to extract his arm. "Work's been crazy." "Too busy for your sister?" She said it loud enough for the people nearby to hear, her tone playful but pointed. She turned to Deshaun, who was watching the exchange with polite interest. "He's my brother." "Well, not by blood, but we might as well be." "He'd do anything for me." "Wouldn't you, Caleb?" Deshaun raised his eyebrows slightly, then took a long sip of his beer. Caleb felt his face flush. "Brianna. Oh, don't be modest." She squeezed his arm, her fingers digging in just a little too hard. "Remember when you helped me move? Carried that whole sofa by yourself practically. That's when I knew this guy's the real deal." She was performing, he realized. Playing to an audience that didn't exist, or didn't care. Marcus had already turned back to the grill, flipping burgers. The other guests were caught up in their own conversations. But Brianna acted like everyone was watching, like this moment was the most important thing happening in the yard. Caleb pulled his arm free, more forcefully this time. "I'm going to grab another beer." He walked toward the cooler, his heart beating faster than it should. When he bent down to fish a bottle from the ice, he saw Brianna out of the corner of his eye. She'd moved to where he'd been standing, next to his work bag, a black canvas messenger bag he'd set down by the fence when he arrived. She was looking at it. Not touching it, exactly, but studying it the way you'd study something you were thinking about taking. Her gaze lingered on the side pocket, where his work badge was clipped. Then her eyes flicked to the main compartment, which was partially unzipped. He kept his GPS logbook in there, the small spiral-bound notebook where he recorded his locations and mileage for work. She glanced up, saw him watching her, and smiled. It was a strange smile, warm on the surface but empty underneath, like a mask that didn't quite fit. Caleb straightened, the beer forgotten. Something cold settled in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name but recognized all the same. The way she'd looked at his bag. The way she'd shown up uninvited. The way she'd marked her territory in front of everyone, calling him brother, like it was a title only she could bestow. He walked back over and picked up his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. "I'm going to head out," he said to Marcus, who was pulling burgers off the grill. "Already? You just got here." "Yeah, I know. I'm not feeling great. Think I'm coming down with something." It wasn't true, but it was easier than explaining. Brianna appeared at his elbow. "I'll walk you out." "That's okay. Stay. Enjoy the party. Don't be silly." She followed him through the gate and onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking on the concrete. When they were out of earshot of the others, she stopped and turned to face him. "What's going on with you?" she asked. Her voice had lost its performative sweetness. Now it was flat, direct. "Nothing. I'm just tired. You've been avoiding me all week." "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been working. You didn't answer my texts." "I was busy." They stared at each other. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Somewhere a dog barked, sharp and insistent. "Are you seeing someone?" Brianna asked. The question caught him off guard. "What? You heard me. Are you seeing someone? Is that why you're acting like this?" "No, I'm not seeing anyone. And I'm not acting like anything. I just needed some space." Her expression hardened. "Space from me. Space from everyone. It's not personal." "It feels personal." Caleb shifted his bag on his shoulder, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say you're not cutting me out. That we're still." She stopped, searching for the right word. "Family." There it was again. That word she used like a leash. He wanted to tell her they weren't family, that family was something you were born into or built through years of trust and sacrifice. Not something you claimed after 10 months of forced intimacy. But he couldn't find the words that wouldn't sound cruel. "I'm not cutting you out," he said finally. "I just need to focus on work right now. That's all." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she smiled, that same empty smile from before. "Okay," she said softly. "If that's what you need." She turned and walked back toward the gate, her sundress swaying. Caleb stood on the sidewalk, watching her go, and the cold feeling in his chest spread. She'd agreed too easily, given up too quickly, like she'd already gotten what she came for. He looked down at his bag, at the side pocket where his badge was clipped. It was still there. He unzipped the main compartment and pulled out his GPS logbook. Everything looked normal, the pages still in order, his notes in his own handwriting. But when he flipped to the most recent entry, he noticed something. A faint crease in the corner of the page, as if someone had held it open and then closed it quickly. It was nothing. Probably nothing. He zipped the bag shut and walked to his car, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocked the door. The sun was starting to set, painting the street in shades of orange and gold. It should have been beautiful. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind of thick, humid air that turned Chicago into a sauna by 10 a.m. Caleb stood in the lobby of the Everett McKinley Dirksen Federal Building, 40 feet below. Where he needed to be, waiting for the service elevator that would take him and his equipment to the mechanical room. The building was a brutalist tower of concrete and glass. Home to federal courts and government offices, and today he was scheduled to inspect the fire suppression system on the upper floors. His supervisor had flagged this one as high priority. There'd been a small electrical fire in the building 3 months ago, nothing catastrophic, just some faulty wiring in a storage closet, but it had revealed gaps in the emergency response protocol. Caleb's job was to verify that every sprinkler head was functional, every alarm connected, every exit clearly marked. He'd arrived early, the way he always did, and signed in with the security desk at 7:15. Now he stood with his inspection kit and his clipboard, mentally running through the checklist he'd memorized years ago. The lobby hummed with the start of week, energy lawyers in suits, clerks with coffee, the occasional defendant being escorted through security in handcuffs. The elevator arrived. Caleb stepped inside and pressed the button for the mechanical room access floor. The doors were sliding shut when he heard a commotion near the main entrance. Raised voices. Someone shouting. The doors stopped, held open by an automatic sensor. Through the gap, Caleb could see the security checkpoint. A woman was arguing with the guards, her voice climbing in volume and pitch. "I need to see him. It's an emergency." Caleb's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. The elevator doors started to close again, but he jammed his hand between them, forcing them open. He stepped back into the lobby, his inspection kit still in hand, and looked toward the entrance. Brianna. She was standing at the metal detector, her purse on the conveyor belt, her face flushed and tear-streaked. 2 security guards flanked her, trying to keep their voices calm and professional while she gesticulated wildly. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. I don't need to do anything. My brother works here and there's a family emergency." One of the guards glanced over at the security desk, where the sergeant on duty was already reaching for his phone. Caleb felt every pair of eyes in the lobby turn toward him. People waiting in line for the metal detector. Lawyers pausing mid-conversation. A judge in robes who'd just stepped out of the elevator. Brianna spotted him. "Caleb." She tried to push past the guards, but they held her back. "Ma'am, you need to wait." "That's him." "Caleb, tell them. Tell them I'm your sister." He stood frozen, his hand still on the elevator door, his brain struggling to process what was happening. The sergeant approached him, his expression professional but wary. "Sir, do you know this woman?" Caleb's mouth felt dry. Yes. I know her. Is she your sister?" The lobby had gone silent. Brianna was staring at him, her eyes wide and desperate, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. She looked genuinely panicked, genuinely in distress, and for a moment he almost believed her. Almost fell back into the pattern of rescuing her from whatever crisis she'd manufactured. "No," he said. His voice came out stronger than he expected. "She's not my sister." Brianna's face crumpled. "Caleb, please. It's Mom. She's in the hospital. I don't have a mother in the hospital." He turned to the sergeant. "I don't know what she's talking about. She's not family." The sergeant nodded and gestured to the other guards. "Ma'am, you need to leave the building." No, you don't understand." Brianna's voice pitched higher, frantic. "There's been an accident. He needs to come with me." They were moving her toward the exit now, gently but firmly. She was still shouting, still trying to make eye contact with Caleb across the lobby. "Why are you doing this? After everything I've done for you." Someone in line muttered something Caleb couldn't hear. A woman with a briefcase shook her head, her expression caught between pity and disgust. The judge in robes turned and walked away, clearly wanting no part of the scene. Caleb felt his face burn. He was standing in the middle of a federal building lobby in his work uniform. His name badge clearly visible, while a woman he'd once considered a friend was being escorted out by security screaming about a fake emergency. He could see his supervisor's face in his mind, could imagine the phone call that would come later. "Bennett, what the hell happened at the Dirksen building this morning?" The guards got Brianna through the doors. Her voice became muffled, then faded entirely as they led her down the steps and onto the street. The sergeant returned to Caleb, his expression carefully neutral. "You want to file a report?" No. I don't think so." Caleb's hands were shaking. He gripped the handle of his inspection kit tighter, trying to steady himself. "You sure? If she shows up again." "I'm sure. Thank you." The sergeant nodded and returned to his desk. The lobby slowly came back to life, people moving through security, conversations resuming, the normal rhythm of a Monday morning reasserting itself. But Caleb could feel the weight of the stares still on him, could see the sideways glances from people who'd witnessed the scene. He turned back to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors opened, he stepped inside and leaned against the wall, his breath coming shallow and fast. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. 40 feet. That's where he'd been when she arrived. 40 feet up, literally above the problem, focused on his work. And she'd found a way to drag him back down. The elevator opened on the mechanical floor. Caleb stepped out into the narrow hallway, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and dust. He set down his kit and pulled out his clipboard, trying to focus on the task ahead. But his hands were still shaking. He took out his phone. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing from Brianna that would explain why she'd shown up here, why she'd caused a scene, why she'd claimed there was a family emergency when there wasn't. Then he noticed something on the floor of the elevator, just visible before the doors closed. A piece of paper. He lunged forward, catching it before the elevator descended. It was a printout. A call log. His landline number, the one he barely used, the one that came with his internet service and that he mostly ignored, was highlighted in yellow marker. The dates went back 3 weeks. Dozens of calls, all made from his number to various recipients. Some to businesses, some to residential numbers he didn't recognize. 1 to 911. Caleb stared at the printout, his mind racing. He didn't make these calls. He'd been at work during most of these timestamps. His landline sat on a table in his apartment, gathering dust, rarely even ringing. But someone had made these calls. Someone using his number. The elevator doors dinged open again. Someone on another floor had called it. Caleb shoved the printout into his jacket pocket and stepped back, his heart hammering. The doors closed. He was alone in the hallway again. She'd dropped it on purpose. Brianna had dropped that call log on purpose, making sure he'd see it. Making sure he'd know what she had, what she could do. It was a message, a warning, or a threat. He pulled the paper back out and scanned it more carefully. The 911 call was dated last Tuesday, the same day as the Medicare billing error. The same day he'd been at the courthouse. The same day he'd met Maya. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. Bennett, I just got a call from Dirksen Building Security. What's going on? Caleb typed a response, deleted it, typed another one. Personal situation. Under control. Won't happen again. The reply came immediately. My office. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. He pocketed the phone and stood in the mechanical hallway, surrounded by pipes and valves and the low hum of the building's infrastructure. This was supposed to be simple. Inspect the sprinklers, file the report, move on to the next job. That's what his life had been for 4 years: predictable, manageable, structured. Now it felt like everything was collapsing. He forced himself to work. Checked the first sprinkler head, tested the pressure, made notes on his clipboard. Moved to the next one. Then the next. The repetitive motion helped, gave his hands something to do, gave his mind something to focus on. That wasn't Brianna's face in the lobby, or the call log in his pocket, or the meeting with his supervisor tomorrow. By noon, he'd finished the upper floors and moved down to the building's main mechanical room in the basement. It was a cavernous space, filled with the building's central HVAC and fire suppression equipment. The air was cooler down here, almost cold, and the sound of his footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. He was testing the main sprinkler valve when he heard the door open behind him. He turned, expecting to see a building maintenance worker or maybe a security guard doing rounds. It was the sergeant from the lobby. The man walked toward him slowly, his hands empty, his expression unreadable. Mr. Bennett? Yes? I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay. I'm fine. Just trying to finish this inspection. The sergeant nodded, but didn't leave. That woman this morning, she seemed pretty convinced you two were related. We're not. She know where you work? Caleb hesitated. Yeah, she knows. You think she'll come back? I don't know. It was the most honest answer he could give. The sergeant studied him for a moment. Look, I've worked security for 20 years. I've seen a lot of situations like this. Someone gets fixated, thinks they have a connection that isn't there. It usually escalates before it gets better. I appreciate the concern, but I can handle it. I'm sure you can. But if she shows up here again, we're filing a report. Trespassing, disorderly conduct, whatever fits. You understand? Caleb nodded. I understand. The sergeant left. Caleb stood alone in the mechanical room, the weight of the day pressing down on him like the tons of concrete above his head. He pulled out the call log again and looked at it in the harsh fluorescent light. Someone had been using his identity. Using his phone line to make calls he didn't authorize. And Brianna had the proof. She'd shown up today not to cause a scene, not to plead some fake emergency. She'd shown up to show him what she had. To let him know she could destroy him whenever she wanted. He thought about the Medicare billing error. The clinic on the south side. The date that matched one of the calls on this log. It wasn't random. None of it was random. Brianna had been building something. Some kind of case against him, some web of false evidence that made it look like he was doing things he'd never done. And today she'd pulled back the curtain just enough to show him it was there. Caleb folded the paper carefully and put it back in his pocket. He finished his inspection mechanically, his mind elsewhere, checking boxes on the clipboard without really seeing them. When he was done, he packed up his kit and left the building through a side exit, avoiding the main lobby. The heat hit him like a wall. The street outside was crowded with lunch-hour pedestrians, men and women in business attire hurrying between buildings. Caleb walked to his truck parked 2 blocks away, got in, and sat there with the engine running, the air conditioning blasting. He pulled out his phone and found Maya Sterling's business card in his wallet. He typed her number into his contacts, then paused. What would he even say? That a woman he used to think was his friend was framing him for crimes he didn't commit? That he had a call log showing 911 calls made from his landline while he was at work? It sounded insane even in his own head. But he saved the number anyway. Just in case. The drive back to his apartment took 40 minutes in midday traffic. When he finally pulled into his parking spot, he saw Brianna's car idling at the far end of the lot. A silver Honda Civic, parked facing his building, the engine running. She was watching, making sure he knew she was watching. Caleb sat in his truck, staring at her car through the windshield. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched out, tense and silent, 2 people locked in a standoff that only one of them seemed to understand. Then her car pulled forward, drove past him slowly, and disappeared around the corner. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. The call came on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after the scene at the Dirksen building. Caleb was at his kitchen table, eating cereal that had gone soggy in the bowl while he stared at his laptop screen when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Is this Caleb Bennett? The voice was male, official, clipped. Caleb's stomach clenched. Yes. Who's this? Detective Ramirez, Chicago Police Department. I need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about a series of 911 calls made from your residence. The cereal spoon fell from Caleb's hand, clattering against the bowl. I'm sorry, what? 911 calls, Mr. Bennett. Multiple calls over the past 3 weeks, all traced to your landline. I'd like to discuss this with you in person. Can you come in this afternoon? I didn't make any 911 calls. Then we'll clear that up when you get here. Does 2 o'clock work? It wasn't really a question. Caleb heard the edge beneath the politeness, the tone that said this was happening whether he cooperated or not. Yeah, 2 o'clock. Which station? Detective Ramirez gave him the address and hung up. Caleb sat at the table, his phone still in his hand, the uneaten cereal growing soggier in front of him. His mind raced through the possibilities. The call log Brianna had dropped. The Medicare billing. The clinic he'd never been to. It was all connected, all part of something bigger than he'd understood. He called his supervisor and left a voicemail saying he had a personal emergency and wouldn't be in for the rest of the day. Then he pulled out Maya Sterling's business card and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Maya Sterling. Hi, this is Caleb Bennett. We met at the courthouse last week. You asked me to consult on a sprinkler case. Oh, right. Hi. Did you get a chance to look at those records? Not yet. I have a different problem. A legal problem. I was wondering if you could help me. There was a pause. What kind of legal problem? The police want to talk to me about some 911 calls I didn't make. They think I did it, but I have proof I was at work when the calls happened. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Don't say anything without a lawyer present. Her voice shifted, became sharper, more focused. Are you being charged with something? I don't know. They just said they want to talk. Then don't talk. Not without representation. Where are you supposed to meet them? Caleb gave her the address. Maya was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I can meet you there at 1:30. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, but I can sit with you and make sure they don't railroad you into saying something stupid. After that, we'll figure out if you need a real lawyer. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just don't say anything until I get there. She hung up. Caleb sat in his kitchen, staring at the soggy cereal, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. 3 weeks ago, his life had made sense. Now he was going to a police station to explain why someone was using his phone to commit crimes. He spent the next 3 hours pulling together documentation. His work calendar, showing the dates and times of his inspections. The GPS logbook from his truck, with timestamps and locations. Credit card receipts proving where he'd been. He stuffed everything into a folder and left for the police station an hour early, too anxious to sit still. The station was a squat brick building on the west side, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras. Caleb parked in the visitor lot and sat in his truck, waiting. At 1:25, he saw Maya pull up in a dark blue sedan. She got out, carrying a leather briefcase, dressed in the same gray blazer she'd worn at the courthouse. "You okay?" she asked when she reached him. "Not really. That's normal. Come on, let's get this over with." They walked into the station together. The front desk officer directed them to a waiting area, where they sat on plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Caleb's leg bounced nervously. Maya noticed and put a hand on his knee. "Stop. You look guilty when you do that." "I am guilty of being an idiot. Being an idiot isn't a crime. Trust me, I work with lawyers." At 2 o'clock exactly, a detective appeared in the doorway. He was in his 40s, stocky, with a mustache that looked like it belonged to a different decade. "Mr. Bennett? I'm Detective Ramirez. You can come back." Maya stood up with Caleb. "I'm Ms. Sterling. I'll be sitting in." Ramirez looked her over, then shrugged. "Fine. This way." They followed him down a narrow hallway painted institutional beige, past holding cells and interrogation rooms, to a small office with a desk and 3 chairs. The room smelled like old coffee and antiseptic. Ramirez gestured for them to sit, then settled into his own chair and pulled out a file. "Mr. Bennett, are you aware that someone has been making 911 calls from your landline?" "Yes. I found out a few days ago." "Did you make these calls?" "No." Ramirez opened the file and slid a document across the desk. It was a call log, more detailed than the printout Brianna had dropped. Dates, times, duration of each call. Caleb scanned it quickly. There were at least 20 calls listed, spanning 3 weeks. "These calls were made from your phone number," Ramirez said. The phone company confirmed it. "Can you explain that?" Caleb pulled out his folder and set it on the desk. "I was at work during almost all of these times. I have my GPS logbook, my work calendar, sign-in sheets from federal buildings. I can prove I wasn't home." Ramirez took the folder and flipped through it, his expression unreadable. "So your position is that someone else was in your apartment making these calls?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe they spoofed my number somehow. I'm not a tech expert, but I know it's possible." "Who has access to your apartment?" Caleb hesitated. "Just me. I live alone." "No girlfriend? No roommate?" "No." "What about keys? You give anyone a spare key?" The question landed like a punch. Caleb's mind flashed back to 8 months ago, when Brianna had insisted he give her a spare key, in case of emergencies. She'd said it was practical, said every good friend should have a spare key, said what if he got locked out or had an accident. He'd given her the key because it seemed easier than arguing. Maya leaned forward. "Detective, if my client gave someone a key to his apartment, that doesn't make him responsible for what they do when he's not there." "Depends on who he gave it to." Ramirez looked back at Caleb. "Who has your spare key?" "A friend. Or someone I thought was a friend. Her name is Brianna Vance." "And where is this spare key now?" "I don't know. I never asked for it back." Ramirez made a note. "Why would this Brianna person want to make fake 911 calls from your apartment?" "I don't know. But she's been acting strange lately. Showing up places uninvited. Causing scenes. She came to my workplace 3 days ago and told security there was a family emergency." "There wasn't." "Family emergency," Ramirez repeated, his tone flat. "She related to you?" "No. She calls me her brother. It's a thing she does." Ramirez and Maya exchanged a glance. Maya's expression was carefully neutral, but Caleb could see the concern in her eyes. This sounded insane. He knew it sounded insane. Ramirez closed the file. "Mr. Bennett, making false 911 calls is a crime. Interference with emergency communications. If we can prove you made these calls, you're looking at criminal charges. Fines, possible jail time. I didn't make them, but they came from your phone. Someone used my phone. I can prove I wasn't there." Ramirez stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll review your documentation. If it checks out, we'll look into this Brianna Vance. But I want you to understand something. Right now, all the evidence points to you. Your number, your apartment, your responsibility. If you're covering for someone, or if you're involved in some kind of scheme we don't know about yet, it's going to come out. And when it does, it'll be a lot worse for you. Caleb stood too, his legs shaky. I'm not covering for anyone. I'm the victim here. Then prove it. They left the office. Maya walked beside him in silence until they reached the parking lot, where she finally stopped and turned to face him. You gave a stranger your apartment key. She wasn't a stranger. We were friends. Were you sleeping with her? No. God, no. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Caleb leaned against his truck, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. She was just there. All the time. Calling herself my sister, acting like we had this bond. I went along with it because it seemed harmless. And now she's using my apartment to commit crimes and I look like an idiot. Maya set her briefcase on the hood of her car. You don't look like an idiot. You look like someone who got manipulated. But that detective is right about one thing. The evidence points to you. If we're going to fix this, we need to figure out what Brianna's endgame is. Why is she doing this? What does she want? I have no idea. Well, you better start figuring it out. Because if she's framing you, she's got a reason. And that reason is going to matter when we try to prove your innocence. Caleb pulled out his phone and scrolled through his text messages, looking for anything from Brianna that might explain her motives. There were dozens of texts over the past few months. Most of them mundane, asking about his day, sharing memes, suggesting they get dinner. But scattered among them were stranger messages. Questions about his work schedule. Reminders that she had his spare key if he ever needed it. A photo she'd sent of his apartment from inside, captioned just watering your plants. Even though he didn't have any plants. He showed the photo to Maya. I never asked her to water plants. I don't have plants. Maya studied the image. When was this taken? 3 weeks ago. Same time frame as the 911 calls. So she was in your apartment, alone, with access to your landline. Maya's jaw tightened. Caleb, I think you need to get your locks changed. Today. I will. And we need to go to your apartment right now. See if there's anything she might have left behind, any evidence we can use. They drove separately to Caleb's building. When he unlocked the door to his apartment, everything looked normal. Same furniture, same dishes in the sink, same stack of mail on the counter. But now it felt violated, like someone had been rifling through his life when he wasn't looking. Maya walked through the apartment methodically, checking drawers, looking under furniture, opening closets. In the living room, she found the landline phone sitting on a side table. She picked it up and examined it. Do you use this? Almost never. It came with the internet service. Call history? Caleb took the phone and scrolled through the menu. The call history had been deleted. Every single entry, wiped clean. She erased it, Maya said. Which means she knew what she was doing. They kept searching. In the bedroom, Maya found a small notebook tucked between the mattress and the box spring. Caleb pulled it out. It wasn't his. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, cramped and precise. Lists of dates and times. Notes about his work schedule. A sketch of his apartment layout with his desk and computer labeled. At the back of the notebook was a photocopy of his social security card. Caleb's hands started to shake. She was planning this. For months. Maya took the notebook and flipped through it, her expression grim. This is identity theft. Fraud. She wasn't just making prank calls. She was building a case to destroy you. But why? I don't know. But we're going to find out. They sat on the couch, the notebook between them, and went through it page by page. There were references to Medicare, to his work ID number, to his GPS logbook. Everything Brianna needed to impersonate him or use his identity for her own purposes. Caleb felt sick. He thought about the casserole dish at Marcus's barbecue, the way she'd touched his arm and called him her brother. He thought about the furniture he'd helped her move, the back pain that still plagued him, the spare key he'd handed over like it meant nothing. He'd been so stupid, so unbelievably, catastrophically stupid. Maya's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then her eyes widened. When? Okay. Thanks for letting me know. She hung up and looked at Caleb. That was a friend who works in the state's attorney's office. There's a warrant out for your arrest. The room tilted. What? Interference with emergency communications. They filed charges an hour ago. Ramirez must have decided your documentation wasn't enough. Caleb stood up, his vision blurring at the edges. This couldn't be happening. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been set up, framed by someone he'd trusted, and now he was going to jail. What do I do? Maya stood too, her voice steady and calm. You turn yourself in. We'll post bail, and then we'll fight this. But right now, you need to come with me to the station before they send officers to pick you up. I can't go to jail. You won't, not for long, but you have to trust me. Caleb looked around his apartment, at the life he'd built over 4 years of hard work and careful planning. It was all collapsing. Everything he'd been, everything he'd believed about himself, was being stripped away by a woman who'd smiled and called him brother while she destroyed him. He picked up his phone and saw his own reflection in the black screen. A stranger's face stared back at him. A man accused of crimes he didn't commit. A man who'd been so desperate for connection that he'd handed over the keys to his life without asking what they'd be used for. Okay, he said quietly. Let's go. They drove back to the police station in silence. When they arrived, Maya walked him to the front desk, where he was processed and fingerprinted and photographed. The mugshot showed a man who looked hollow, defeated, like someone who'd already been convicted. He was placed in a holding cell with 3 other men, all of them waiting for arraignment. Caleb sat on a metal bench and stared at the concrete floor, trying to understand how his life had come to this. Through the bars, he could see Maya talking to someone in a suit, gesturing emphatically, her voice too low to hear. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights never dimmed. The air smelled like sweat and disinfectant. Caleb's mind kept circling back to that notebook, to the photocopy of his social security card, to the look on Brianna's face when she'd dropped the call log in the elevator. She'd won. Whatever game she was playing, she'd won. Finally, a guard called his name. He was led to a courtroom where a judge read the charges in a bored monotone. Interference with emergency communications. Bail set at $5,000. Caleb didn't have $5,000. But Maya did. She posted it, and an hour later he walked out of the courthouse into the cold evening air. A free man only because someone he barely knew had decided to trust him. They stood on the courthouse steps. Maya looked exhausted, her blazer wrinkled, her ponytail coming undone. Thank you, Caleb said. It felt completely inadequate. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work to do. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Maya was quiet for a moment. Because I've seen what it's like when someone decides to destroy you and the system doesn't care. My sister went through something similar a few years ago. Abusive ex, false allegations, the whole nightmare. She almost lost everything. So when I see someone going through the same thing, I help. Because someone should have helped her. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since the moment he'd answered Detective Ramirez's call. I don't know how to fix this. We'll figure it out. But first, you need to sleep. And tomorrow, we start building your defense. He drove home alone, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. When he pulled into his parking lot, Brianna's car was there again, idling in the same spot as before. Watching, Caleb sat in his truck, staring at her through the windshield. He wanted to march over there, demand to know why she was doing this, force her to explain what he'd done to deserve being torn apart. But he knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't going to tell him the truth. She was going to keep playing, keep destroying, until there was nothing left. He got out of his truck and walked to his apartment without looking back. But he could feel her eyes on him, could feel the weight of her gaze like a hand on his shoulder. When he unlocked his door and stepped inside, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A new Medicare statement on the table. Another charge from a clinic he'd never been to. Another piece of the puzzle Brianna was building, one lie at a time. Caleb picked up the statement and read it in the dim light of his living room. His name, his social security number, services he'd never received. He crumpled the paper in his fist and sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Outside, Brianna's car engine hummed. Inside, the walls seemed to close in. And somewhere deep in his mind, a thought formed that he couldn't shake. I thought I was a good man, but now I'm just a file number. Friends, we've just heard how Caleb Bennett's world came crashing down in the span of a single afternoon. A meticulous fire inspector, a man who'd built his life on precision and integrity, found himself standing in a police station with a mugshot bearing his name and a criminal charge he didn't commit. Brianna Vance, the woman who called herself his sister, had been weaving a web for months. Spare keys. Medicare fraud. False 911 calls. A notebook filled with his personal information, hidden between his mattress and box spring. She'd turned his own apartment into a crime scene and made him the suspect. But here's what Caleb didn't know yet, sitting in that holding cell with the weight of false accusations crushing him. The very precision that made him a good inspector was about to become his salvation. Those GPS logs. Those sign-in sheets. Those timestamps he'd recorded so carefully, day after day, never imagining they'd be the difference between freedom and prison. We've reached the darkest moment. But as anyone who's been through betrayal knows, sometimes you have to lose everything before you can see what you're really made of. Stay with us, because Caleb's story is about to take a turn that Brianna never saw coming. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the crumpled Medicare statement, Maya's business card, and the notebook they'd found hidden in his bedroom. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway above him. He kept replaying the moment in the courthouse when the judge had read the charges. The flat monotone voice reducing his life to a case number and a dollar amount. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he pulled out an old photo album he kept in a box under his bed. He didn't know why. Maybe he needed proof that his life had been real before Brianna entered it, that he'd existed as someone other than a defendant. He flipped through the pages slowly. Pictures of his academy graduation when he'd first gotten certified as an inspector. A fishing trip with his dad 5 years ago, both of them grinning next to a lake in Wisconsin. His mom's funeral the year after that, the last photo taken of them together as a family before she was gone. He stopped at a picture from his first week on the job. He was standing in front of the federal courthouse, his new work badge clipped to his belt, his expression serious and proud. He'd felt like he mattered then. Like the work he did kept people safe, kept buildings standing, kept order in a world that could burn down at any moment if someone wasn't paying attention. Now he was just someone who'd been foolish enough to hand over his keys. The memory came to him suddenly, sharp and clear. It was last November, nearly a year ago. Brianna had invited him over for dinner, insisting she wanted to thank him properly for helping her move. The apartment had smelled like garlic and wine, and she'd been warm and grateful, telling him stories about her childhood and asking about his. At some point in the evening, she'd mentioned emergencies. What if something happens and you can't get in touch with anyone, she'd said. You live alone, Caleb. That's dangerous. What if you fall or have a medical emergency? I'm 32. I'm not falling. But what if? I'm serious. You should give someone a spare key. Just in case. He'd laughed it off, but she'd kept bringing it up over the next few weeks. Casually, gently, like she was genuinely worried about his safety. Until finally, one Sunday afternoon when she was helping him set up his Wi-Fi router, he'd pulled the spare key from the kitchen drawer and handed it to her. Here, if it'll make you stop worrying. She'd smiled, that same bright empty smile, and slipped the key into her purse. Thank you. I promise I'll only use it in emergencies. Caleb closed the photo album and pushed it away. He'd given her the key. He'd let her into his apartment, let her water his plants, let her take photos of his living room and send them to him like it was charming instead of invasive. He'd seen the red flags and ignored every single one because it was easier than confronting her, easier than admitting he'd misjudged someone so completely. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Can't sleep either. Spent the night looking into Brianna. Found some things. Coffee tomorrow? 9 a.m.? He replied yes. Where? Cafe on Monroe. The one with the blue awning. Caleb set the phone down and looked at the notebook again. The lists. The dates. The photocopy of his social security card. This wasn't impulsive. Brianna hadn't snapped one day and decided to ruin him. She'd been building toward this for months, collecting pieces of his life like someone assembling a case file. But why? What had he done to deserve this level of calculation? He'd helped her move furniture. He'd answered her calls. He'd been a friend, or tried to be. Where had it turned into something else? The answer came to him as the first light of dawn crept through his window. It wasn't about what he'd done. It was about what she could take. She'd looked at him and seen someone useful, someone she could manipulate and control and ultimately sacrifice. The brother label wasn't affection. It was ownership. By the time Caleb left for the cafe, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to keep apologizing for being trusting. He wasn't going to keep acting like this was his fault for missing the signs. Brianna had done this deliberately, methodically, and now he was going to prove it. Maya was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a laptop open in front of her. She looked more alert than she had any right to be after posting bail at 9 o'clock the night before. "Drink this," she said, pushing one of the cups toward him. "You look like death." "I feel like death." "Good. Anger is more useful than despair." She turned the laptop so he could see the screen. "I did some digging." Brianna Vance, 31, pharmaceutical marketing manager at Viridian Health Solutions. Clean record, no arrests, no civil suits. On paper, she's a model citizen. On paper. But here's where it gets interesting. Maya pulled up a search result. 3 years ago, she was listed as a witness in a fraud case. Insurance scam involving fake medical claims. The defendant was her boyfriend at the time, a guy named Trevor Marsh. He got 18 months. She testified against him as part of a plea deal. Caleb felt something click into place. She knows how to commit fraud. And how to avoid getting caught. Or at least, how to make someone else take the fall. Maya scrolled through more documents. "I also found this. She filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. Discharged $30,000 in credit card debt. So she's broke. Or was. But pharmaceutical marketing managers make decent money. So either she's spending it as fast as she makes it, or she needs more," Caleb finished. "That's what this is about. Money." Maya nodded. "Medicare fraud is profitable if you know what you're doing. Fake billing, phantom appointments, identity theft. She uses your information to submit claims, pockets the insurance payouts, and you're left holding the bag when it all falls apart." Caleb thought about the Medicare statements. The clinic on the south side he'd never been to. The charges for services he'd never received. How much do you think she's stolen? No way to know yet. But if she's been at this for 3 weeks, submitting multiple claims? Could be thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. The enormity of it settled over him. Brianna hadn't just ruined his reputation. She'd used his identity as a tool to commit crimes that could follow him for years, destroying his credit, his career, his entire future. "We need to prove it," he said. "We will. But we need evidence. The notebook helps, but it's not enough. We need to show she had access to your apartment, that she had motive, that the timing matches. And we need to explain the 911 calls. Those were just misdirection," Caleb said slowly. "She wanted me arrested before I figured out the Medicare fraud. Make me look like a criminal so no one would believe me when I said I was innocent." Maya stared at him. "That's actually brilliant. In a sociopathic kind of way." They spent the next hour building a timeline. Every interaction Caleb could remember with Brianna, every time she'd been in his apartment, every question she'd asked about his work schedule. Maya took notes, cross-referencing dates with the call logs and Medicare statements. By the time they finished, the pattern was undeniable. Brianna had been systematically harvesting his personal information from the moment she'd met him. "We take this to Detective Ramirez," Maya said. "Show him what we found. Get him to investigate Brianna instead of you. You think he'll listen? He's a cop. They like solving crimes. And if we hand him a better suspect with actual evidence, he'll follow it." Caleb wanted to believe her. But part of him, the part that had spent the night in a holding cell, that had seen his own face in a mugshot, didn't trust the system anymore. Still, it was all they had. They gathered the evidence and drove to the police station. Detective Ramirez agreed to meet with them, though his expression suggested he thought they were wasting his time. But as Maya laid out the timeline, showed him the notebook, explained Brianna's history with fraud, something in his face changed. "You're saying this woman framed you to cover up Medicare fraud?" "Yes," Caleb said. Ramirez leaned back in his chair. "That's a hell of a theory." "It's not a theory. It's what happened. Can you prove she was in your apartment during the times these calls were made?" Caleb hesitated. "Not directly. But she had my key. And the notebook was in my bedroom. Which she could say you planted there." Maya cut in. "Detective, we're giving you a suspect with motive, means, and a history of fraud. All we're asking is that you investigate." Ramirez studied them both for a long moment. Then he sighed and pulled out a notepad. "Give me her address. I'll bring her in for questioning. But Bennett, you're still facing charges until I can prove otherwise." Don't leave town. It wasn't exoneration, but it was a start. The next 2 weeks felt like living in suspension. Caleb went to work, conducted his inspections, filed his reports. But everything had a dreamlike quality, like he was watching someone else go through the motions of his life. His supervisor had put him on administrative leave after the arrest, pending an internal review. The union representative said not to worry, that they'd fight the charges, but Caleb could see the doubt in the man's eyes. Maya called him every few days with updates. Detective Ramirez had questioned Brianna, who'd played the victim perfectly shocked, hurt, insisting she'd only been trying to help Caleb by having a spare key. She claimed the notebook wasn't hers, that maybe Caleb had planted it to frame her because he was going through something. The performance was so convincing that Ramirez had almost believed her. Almost. Because Maya had done something Brianna hadn't anticipated. She'd subpoenaed the phone company's cell tower records. "Look at this," Maya said, spreading printouts across Caleb's kitchen table. It was a Tuesday evening, rain drumming against the windows. "These are pings from Brianna's cell phone. The towers track her location every time she uses it." Caleb leaned over the documents. Each line showed a date, time, and cell tower location. "Here," Maya pointed. "September 23, 2:15 p.m. Brianna's phone pinged off a tower 3 blocks from your apartment. You were at the courthouse that day. That's when one of the 911 calls was made." "Exactly. And here's September 29, 4:30 p.m. Another tower near your building. Another 911 call." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. She was here. Every time a call was made, she was here. Not just here. "Look at the duration." Maya pulled up another document. The 911 calls averaged 3 to 4 minutes each. And Brianna's phone was stationary during each one. She wasn't just passing through your neighborhood. She was inside, making the calls, then leaving. It was beautiful. Damning. Irrefutable. "Does Ramirez have this?" "He does now. I sent it this morning." Caleb sat back in his chair, something like hope flickering in his chest for the first time in weeks. "This proves it. This proves I didn't do it. It proves someone else was in your apartment during the calls. We still need to connect it to the Medicare fraud." Maya pulled out another file. "Which is why I spent yesterday at the county clerk's office pulling financial records." "You can do that? If you know what you're looking for." Brianna filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago, which means her financials became public record. And guess what I found? She slid a document across the table. It was a bank statement from 18 months ago, showing a series of deposits. Small amounts, $200, $300, $500, but consistent. Dozens of them over a 6-month period. "These are insurance reimbursements," Maya said. "Medicare payments for services rendered." But here's the problem. I cross-referenced the dates with employment records. Brianna didn't have any medical procedures during this time. She was perfectly healthy. "Phantom billing," Caleb said. "Exactly. She was running the same scam back then, using someone else's information. Probably her boyfriend, the one who went to jail. When he got caught, she testified against him to avoid prosecution. But she kept doing it. And when she ran out of people to use, she found me." Maya nodded grimly. "You were perfect. Single, trusting, with a clean record and good credit. She could use your identity for months before anyone noticed." Caleb thought about the night she'd asked for his spare key, the careful way she'd built trust. It hadn't been friendship. It had been recruitment. "How much did she steal?" he asked. "From you? I'm still calculating. But based on the Medicare statements we found, I'd estimate $15,000 to $20,000 in fraudulent claims over the past month alone." The number hit him like a punch. $20,000. His name, his social security number, used to drain the system while he sat at work inspecting fire sprinklers. "We need to freeze my credit," Caleb said. "File an identity theft report. Make sure she can't do any more damage." "Already done. I filed the paperwork yesterday." Maya paused. "But there's something else. The Medicare fraud is federal. If we can prove Brianna did this, she's not looking at probation. She's looking at years. Years. Real prison time." Caleb tried to imagine Brianna in an orange jumpsuit, sitting in a cell like the one he'd occupied for 6 hours, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a hollow ache where something used to be. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait for Ramirez to do his job. He's got the cell tower records, the financial documents, the notebook. If he follows the evidence, he'll arrest her. And if he doesn't? Maya's expression hardened. Then we take it to the U.S. Attorney's office ourselves. Medicare fraud is their jurisdiction. They'll investigate even if the city won't. Caleb looked at the rain-streaked window, at the dark street beyond. Somewhere out there, Brianna was going about her life, thinking she'd won. Thinking she'd destroyed him thoroughly enough that he'd never fight back. She was wrong. Over the next week, Caleb and Maya worked like they were building a case for trial. They organized every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence into a timeline that was impossible to refute. They made copies, labeled everything, built a narrative so clear that even a skeptical detective couldn't ignore it. On Thursday morning, Maya got the call she'd been waiting for. Detective Ramirez wanted to meet. He had news. They drove to the station together, neither of them speaking. When they arrived, Ramirez was waiting in his office, looking tired but satisfied. "We arrested Brianna Vance this morning," he said without preamble. "Charged her with identity theft, wire fraud, and making false emergency calls. The U.S. Attorney's office is handling the Medicare fraud separately. That'll come later." Caleb felt the room tilt slightly. "You arrested her." The cell tower records were the nail in the coffin. She couldn't explain why her phone was at your apartment during every single 911 call. "When we searched her car, we found a notebook identical to the one you gave us. Different handwriting, same information. She'd been keeping 2 sets of records. Is she in custody now? Released on bail, like you were. But she's facing serious time if convicted. The prosecutor thinks they can get her to plead to 5 years. 5 years. Caleb tried to process it, but the number felt abstract. He'd spent weeks thinking his life was over, and now Brianna was the one facing prison. "What about the charges against me?" Maya asked. "Dropped. As of this morning. The state's attorney filed a motion to dismiss based on new evidence." "You're clear, Bennett. Clear." The word hung in the air, simple and enormous. "Thank you," Caleb managed. Ramirez shrugged. "I'm just doing my job. You did the hard part. Most people in your position would have taken a plea deal and moved on. You fought. That matters." They left the station in a daze. On the steps outside, Maya turned to Caleb and smiled a real smile, not the professional mask she usually wore. "You're free," she said. "I'm free." They stood there in the cold spring air, watching people hurry past on their way to wherever people go when their lives aren't falling apart. Caleb thought about the past month, about how close he'd come to losing everything. About the moment in the holding cell when he'd believed he was truly beaten. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. "Yes, you could have. You just would have taken longer." Still, Maya's expression softened. "My sister, the one I told you about? She didn't have anyone to fight for her. She went through it alone, and it nearly broke her. So when I saw you going through the same thing, I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't watch someone get destroyed and do nothing." Caleb understood then. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd been falsely accused, every victim who didn't have the resources or knowledge or sheer stubborn will to fight back. Maya had turned his case into her sister's second chance. "How is she now?" he asked. "Your sister? Better. She moved to Portland, started over. We talk every week." "That's good." They stood in silence for another moment. Then Maya checked her watch. "I have to get back to the office." "But Caleb? Take a few days. Rest. Process this. And when you're ready, call me. We should celebrate properly." "I will." She walked to her car, and he watched her drive away, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite happiness, it was too soon for that. But maybe the beginning of it. The first crack in the ice. Caleb drove home slowly, taking side streets instead of the highway, wanting to stretch out the moment. When he pulled into his parking lot, Brianna's car wasn't there. For the first time in a month, she wasn't watching. He climbed the stairs to his apartment and unlocked the door. Everything looked the same furniture, same dishes in the sink, but it felt different. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted that he hadn't realized he was carrying. He walked to his desk and pulled out the folder of documents they'd assembled. The GPS logs. The work calendar. The receipts and sign-in sheets and timestamps that had proved he was innocent. All those small acts of precision he'd performed without thinking, All those habits that had seemed pointless in the moment had saved him. Caleb closed the folder and set it aside. He didn't need it anymore. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Marcus's number. They hadn't spoken since the barbecue, since the day Brianna had shown up uninvited and marked her territory. "Hey man," he texted. "I know it's been a weird few weeks. Want to grab a beer sometime?" The response came almost immediately. "Yeah, absolutely. I heard about what happened. Glad you're okay. Thanks. I'll explain everything. No rush. Just good to hear from you." Caleb set the phone down and looked around his apartment. The notebook was gone, handed over to the police as evidence. The Medicare statements were filed away. The spare key Brianna had taken would be changed tomorrow when the locksmith came. Everything was being rebuilt, slowly, carefully. He thought about what Maya had said on the courthouse steps. "You're free." It was true, but freedom felt different than he'd expected. Not triumphant or victorious, just quiet, like the moment after a storm when you step outside and realize the air is still. Caleb walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Brianna was preparing for trial, facing the consequences of what she'd done. Somewhere out there, Maya was helping another client, fighting another case. And here he was, still standing. He picked up his work badge from the desk and clipped it to his belt, even though he wasn't working today. It felt right to wear it. To remember who he was underneath all the accusations and fear. A fire inspector. Someone who checked the details, who made sure systems worked the way they were supposed to. Someone who kept buildings from burning down. He'd been tested in ways he'd never anticipated, and he'd survived. Not unscathed, he could still feel the rawness where trust used to be but intact. Tomorrow he'd go back to work. Fill out the paperwork to end his administrative leave. Start rebuilding his reputation one inspection at a time. But tonight, he just stood at the window and watched the sun set on the worst month of his life, knowing that when it rose again, he'd still be here. Still standing, still fighting, still free. The trial was set for 6 weeks later, but Brianna's attorney filed for a continuance, then another, dragging the process into early December. Caleb had returned to work, his administrative leave lifted after an internal review confirmed he'd been the victim, not the perpetrator. His supervisor shook his hand and apologized for doubting him, and his coworkers welcomed him back with carefully neutral expressions that said they weren't sure what to believe. But the work helped. Every inspection was a reminder that he was good at something, that he had value beyond what Brianna had tried to reduce him to. He checked sprinkler systems and fire alarms and emergency exits with the same meticulous care he'd always brought to the job, and slowly, very slowly, his life began to feel like his own again. Maya kept him updated on the legal proceedings. Brianna had pleaded not guilty to all charges, despite the mountain of evidence against her. Her attorney was arguing that the cell tower records were circumstantial, that anyone could have been in Caleb's apartment, that the notebook could have been planted. It was desperate. Transparent lawyer couldn't argue with the facts, so he was trying to confuse them. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. They'd found more evidence during the investigation, additional Medicare claims filed under different names, a laptop in Brianna's apartment, with spreadsheets tracking fraudulent billing, emails between her and a clinic administrator who'd been helping her submit false claims in exchange for a cut of the payments. The administrator had already taken a plea deal and agreed to testify against her. Brianna was going down. It was just a question of how hard she'd fall. On a cold Monday in December, Maya called Caleb with news. She's taking a plea. 2 years supervised probation, $10,000 in restitution, permanent record. The federal charges are being dropped in exchange for cooperation in the larger Medicare fraud investigation. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. That's it? 2 years probation? It's more than it sounds like. She'll have to check in with a probation officer weekly, submit to random drug tests, maintain employment. And the restitution means she'll be paying back the money for years. Plus, the conviction stays on her record permanently. She'll never work in healthcare again, never pass a background check for any job that requires trust. But she's not going to prison. Maya was quiet for a moment. No, she's not. After everything she did, after she tried to destroy me. I know, I'm sorry. The system isn't perfect. Caleb stood at his kitchen window, looking out at the street where Brianna's car used to idle. The space was empty now, had been for weeks. When's the sentencing? Thursday, 2 p.m. You can be there if you want. Victim impact statement, if you'd like to give one. I'll be there. Thursday arrived cold and gray, the kind of Chicago winter day that made you wonder if the sun still existed somewhere above the clouds. Caleb put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to his mother's funeral, and drove to the courthouse. Maya met him in the lobby, looking professional and fierce in her gray blazer. You ready? She asked. No, but I'm here anyway. They took the elevator to the third floor, to the same courtroom where Caleb had been arraigned months ago. The room was nearly empty, just the judge, the court reporter, the prosecutor, Brianna's attorney, and a handful of observers in the back rows. Brianna sat at the defense table, wearing a conservative navy dress and minimal makeup, her hands folded in her lap like she was praying. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Patricia Hernandez was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every con and heard every excuse and wasn't interested in hearing another one. Please be seated, she said. We're here for sentencing in the matter of People versus Vance. Ms. Vance, please stand. Brianna stood, her attorney beside her. She looked smaller than Caleb remembered, diminished somehow, like the weeks of legal proceedings had worn her down to something fragile. But when she glanced back at the gallery, her eyes found Caleb's, and for just a moment he saw something flicker there. Not remorse, not regret, just calculation. She was still playing, still performing, still trying to figure out how to win. The prosecutor stood and began her statement, outlining the charges, the evidence, the plea agreement. Brianna had agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of identity theft and 1 count of making false emergency communications. In exchange, the federal Medicare fraud charges would be deferred pending completion of probation and restitution. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, the defendant engaged in a deliberate, sustained campaign to defraud both the government and an innocent individual. She stole Mr. Bennett's identity, used his personal information to submit fraudulent insurance claims, and when he began to suspect what was happening, she attempted to frame him for crimes she herself committed. This was not a mistake. This was calculated predation. Judge Hernandez nodded, making notes. Then she looked at Brianna. Ms. Vance, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? Brianna's attorney whispered something to her. She nodded, then turned to face the judge. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Mr. Bennett for the pain I caused him. I was going through a difficult time financially, and I made terrible choices. I never intended for things to go as far as they did. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm deeply sorry. The words were perfect. Contrite, humble, just vague enough to avoid admitting the full scope of what she'd done. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. Judge Hernandez studied Brianna for a long moment. Ms. Vance, I've read the pre-sentencing report. I've reviewed the evidence. And I have to tell you, I'm not impressed by your apology. You didn't make terrible choices. You executed a sophisticated fraud scheme that required planning, patience, and a complete disregard for the harm you were causing. You violated Mr. Bennett's trust, invaded his home, stole his identity, and then tried to send him to prison to cover your tracks. That's not a difficult time. That's criminal behavior. Brianna's face went pale. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. However, the judge continued, you've agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. And the prosecution has recommended leniency in exchange for that cooperation. So I'm going to accept the plea agreement. 2 years supervised probation. $10,000 in restitution to Mr. Bennett, payable in monthly installments beginning immediately. You will also perform 200 hours of community service and undergo mandatory counseling for narcissistic personality traits. Brianna nodded, her eyes downcast. But understand this, Ms. Vance. If you violate the terms of your probation in any way, if you miss a check-in, if you fail a drug test, if you so much as jaywalk, I will revoke your probation and you will serve the maximum sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Mr. Bennett, I understand you'd like to make a victim impact statement? Caleb stood, his legs unsteady. Maya had helped him write the statement, but now, standing in the courtroom with Brianna 10 feet away, the words he'd prepared felt inadequate. Your Honor, 6 months ago I thought I knew who I was. I was a fire inspector, good at my job, proud of the work I did. I had friends, a life I'd built carefully over years. Then Brianna Vance entered that life, and piece by piece, she dismantled it. She took my spare key and used it to enter my apartment when I wasn't home. She photographed my personal documents, copied my social security number, learned my work schedule. She used my identity to commit fraud, then made it look like I was the criminal. He paused, forcing himself to look at her. She was staring at the table, her expression blank. The worst part wasn't the arrest or the charges or even the night I spent in a holding cell. The worst part was realizing that someone I'd trusted, someone I'd helped and cared about, had looked at me and seen nothing but an opportunity. A tool to be used and discarded. I thought we were friends. But to her, I was just a name on a Medicare card. Brianna's hands clenched in her lap, but she didn't look up. I've gotten my life back now, mostly. The charges were dropped, I'm working again, my credit is frozen so she can't do any more damage. But I'm not the same person I was before. I don't trust people the way I used to. I don't let anyone get close. And that's a loss that $10,000 in restitution can't fix. Caleb sat down. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system and the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on the stenograph keys. Judge Hernandez nodded. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Your statement is noted for the record. She turned back to Brianna. Ms. Vance, you will report to the probation office on Monday to begin your supervision. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Brianna stood and was led out of the courtroom by her attorney, her head down, her shoulders hunched. She didn't look at Caleb as she passed. Didn't acknowledge him at all. And just like that, it was over. Maya touched Caleb's arm. You okay? I don't know. I thought I'd feel something. Relief, or closure, or something. But I just feel empty. That's normal. Justice doesn't always feel the way you think it will. They walked out of the courthouse together, into the cold December air. Snow was starting to fall, light flakes that melted as soon as they hit the pavement. Caleb pulled his coat tighter and looked up at the gray sky. 2 years probation, he said. For ruining my life. It's not nothing. She'll be monitored, restricted, paying you back. And if she screws up, she goes to prison. That's real accountability, I guess. They stood on the courthouse steps, watching people hurry past with their heads down against the wind. Lawyers in long coats. Defendants clutching paperwork. The ordinary machinery of justice grinding forward, case after case, life after life. What happens now? Caleb asked. Now you move on. Get back to your life. Let this become something that happened to you, not something that defines you. Easier said than done. Yeah, but you'll do it anyway. You're tougher than you think. Caleb wanted to believe her. Part of him did. The part that had survived the arrest and the interrogation and the weeks of uncertainty. The part that had assembled evidence and fought back and refused to be destroyed. But there was another part smaller, quieter that would always remember what it felt like to be betrayed. To hand someone your trust and watch them use it as a weapon. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a text he'd received that morning. From his supervisor, inspection Thursday cancelled. Enjoy the day off. You want to get coffee? He asked Maya. Somewhere that's not related to courtrooms or police stations. She smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. They walked down the courthouse steps together, into the snow, into the rest of their lives. Behind them, the building stood gray and implacable, holding the records of what had happened. The testimony and evidence and plea agreements that would gather dust in filing cabinets until someone needed them again. But Caleb didn't look back. He kept walking forward, one step at a time, toward whatever came next. Spring came late to Chicago that year. Caleb noticed it first in small things, the way the light changed in the early morning, softer and warmer than the harsh winter glare. The sound of birds in the trees outside his apartment. The smell of rain on concrete instead of snow. He was sitting at his kitchen table on a Saturday morning in late March. Signing a new government contract for a series of inspections at O'Hare Airport, when he realized something had shifted. The signature didn't make his hand shake anymore. The sound of his pen scratching across paper didn't remind him of police reports or court documents. It was just a signature. His name, written in his own hand, meaning exactly what it was supposed to mean. For the first time in almost a year, it felt like his. He set the pen down and looked at the contract. It was a good job, well paid, the kind of work that would keep him busy for months. His supervisor had offered it to him personally, saying, "You're the most thorough inspector we've got, Bennett. I want you on this." The words had felt good. Not triumphant, exactly. Just solid. Like being reminded of something he'd known before Brianna, before the arrest, before everything had fallen apart. He was good at his job. That hadn't changed. On the desk next to the contract sat a photo. New, taken just 2 weeks ago. Caleb and Maya at a restaurant in Logan Square, both of them smiling, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. They'd been seeing each other for 3 months now, slowly, carefully, neither of them rushing into anything. She understood what it was like to rebuild trust after it had been shattered. She didn't push. Last week, she'd asked him if he wanted to move in together. He'd said no, not yet. She'd nodded, understanding. "When you're ready," she'd said. And he'd loved her a little more for not making it a test. Caleb picked up the photo and studied it. He looked different than he had in the mugshot from last summer. Older, maybe, but also more solid, like he'd been carved out of something harder than before. The man in the photo knew what betrayal felt like. Knew what it was like to be falsely accused and fight his way back to innocence. That knowledge had cost him something. But it had also given him something he couldn't quite name. A kind of clarity, maybe. Or just the simple recognition that he could survive things he'd thought would destroy him. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus: "Barbecue tomorrow, 3 p.m. You and Maya coming?" Caleb typed back, "Yeah, we'll be there." He hadn't been to Marcus's place since the day Brianna showed up with her casserole dish, marking territory. The memory still stung, but it was distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. Marcus had apologized for not stepping in that day, for not recognizing the red flags. "I should have said something," he'd told Caleb over beers a month ago. "I could see she was being weird, but I didn't want to get involved." Caleb had shrugged. "I didn't see it either. Not until it was too late. Still, I'm your friend. I should have had your back." They'd left it at that, and the friendship had slowly rebuilt itself, one beer at a time. Caleb stood and walked to the window. The street below was alive with Saturday morning activity, people walking dogs, kids on bikes, a couple pushing a stroller. Ordinary life, the kind he'd taken for granted before Brianna. He thought about her sometimes, wondered what she was doing. Maya had told him she was working at a call center now, one of the few jobs that didn't require a background check. She lived in a studio apartment in a cheaper neighborhood, taking the bus to work, checking in with her probation officer every week. The restitution payments came on time every month, exactly $200, deposited into Caleb's account like clockwork. He didn't spend the money. He put it in a separate savings account and tried not to think about it. Eventually, when the $10,000 was paid off, he'd decide what to do with it. Donate it, maybe. Or use it for something meaningful, something that would turn her crime into something useful. But that was a problem for future Caleb. Right now, he just wanted to enjoy the morning. He made coffee, real coffee from beans he'd ground himself, not the instant kind he'd been drinking when his life was falling apart. He sat at the table and read the news on his phone. The Cubs were looking good for the season. There was construction starting on the Red Line. A new restaurant was opening in his neighborhood. Normal things. Small things. The texture of a life that was his own again. At noon, he drove to the locksmith and picked up his new work ID badge. The old one had been compromised during the investigation, and the city had issued him a replacement with a new photo and updated security clearance. When the locksmith handed it to him, Caleb clipped it to his belt and felt something settle into place. This was who he was. Not a defendant, not a victim, not a case file, just Caleb Bennett, fire suppression inspector, good at his job, moving forward. He drove to Maya's apartment and picked her up for lunch. They went to a diner on Halsted, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner too long. She ordered pancakes. He ordered eggs and toast. "You seem lighter today," she said, studying him across the table. "I feel lighter." "Good. You've earned it." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when you don't need to fill every moment with conversation. Caleb watched Maya add syrup to her pancakes, methodical and precise, and thought about how different this was from anything he'd had with Brianna. Real. grounded, built on truth instead of performance. After lunch, they walked through Lincoln Park, past the zoo and the pond, past families having picnics and runners doing laps around the path. The air smelled like new grass and lake water, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. He still had moments when he woke up from dreams about the holding cell. Still flinched when he saw silver Honda Civics in parking lots. But underneath those echoes was something solid and real. He'd survived. And more than that, he'd learned to recognize the warning signs he'd missed before. The too quick intimacy. The manufactured emergencies. The way Brianna had made him feel necessary while simultaneously making him feel like he was never doing enough. He wouldn't miss those signs again. That evening, he went home alone. Maya had work to do, case files to review, and he was okay with that. He didn't need constant contact anymore, didn't need someone else there to prove he wasn't broken. He was whole on his own. Caleb sat at his desk and pulled out a journal he'd started keeping at Maya's suggestion. "Write down how you feel," she'd said. "Don't edit it, just write." He'd been skeptical at first, but it had helped. Putting words to the confusion and anger and fear had made them smaller, more manageable. Tonight, he wrote, 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought Brianna had destroyed me so thoroughly that there was nothing left to rebuild. I was wrong. She took a lot from me. My trust, my sense of safety, the easy confidence I used to have in my own judgment. But she didn't take everything. She didn't take my work. She didn't take my ability to fight back. And she didn't take the core of who I am, someone who values truth, who checks the details, who doesn't give up when things get hard. I'm not the same person I was before. But I'm not sure I'd want to be. That person was naive, trusting in ways that left him vulnerable. The person I am now knows better. Knows to protect himself. Knows to look for the warning signs. Maya asked me today if I regret meeting Brianna. I said no. Because if I hadn't met her, I wouldn't have learned what I'm capable of. I wouldn't have met Maya. I wouldn't have discovered that I'm stronger than I thought. So no, I don't regret it. I just wish it hadn't cost so much. He closed the journal and set it aside. Outside, the sun was setting, painting his apartment in shades of orange and gold. The same light that had felt like a warning 6 months ago now just felt like evening. Caleb picked up his new work ID and looked at the photo. The man in the picture looked calm, competent, ready for whatever came next. It was a good picture. An honest one. He set the ID on his desk next to the photo of him and Maya, 2 pieces of evidence that his life was his own again. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd lived in for 8 years. Chicago in spring, beautiful and harsh and full of possibility. He'd been tested in ways he'd never anticipated. He'd been accused, arrested, humiliated. He'd spent a night in a holding cell thinking his life was over. He'd stood in a courtroom and watched his betrayer get a sentence that felt too light for the damage she'd caused. But he'd survived all of it. And more than that, he'd learned something essential about who he was when everything else was stripped away. He was a man who checked the details, who kept records, who didn't give up, and that was enough. Caleb turned away from the window and picked up the pen he'd used to sign the government contract. He looked at it for a moment, just a cheap ballpoint pen, the kind you could buy by the dozen at any office supply store. But it was his pen. His signature. His life. For the first time in years, he signed his own name and it actually felt like his. He set the pen down and smiled, just a little. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the scars had healed completely. But because he was still here. Still standing. Still building. And that was more than enough. Friends, how did you find Caleb's story today? We watched a good man, a meticulous fire inspector who built his life on precision and integrity come face to face with a kind of betrayal that most of us pray we'll never encounter. Brianna Vance didn't just steal his identity or drain his bank account. She studied him, learned his routines, exploited his kindness, and then methodically tried to destroy him when he started to figure out what she'd done. But here's what makes Caleb's story worth remembering: the very traits that made him vulnerable, his attention to detail, his careful record-keeping, his habit of documenting everything became the weapons that saved him. Those GPS logs he filled out every day. Those work calendars he maintained. Those receipts he kept in neat folders. They weren't just paperwork, they were proof. They were the difference between freedom and prison. There's a lesson in that for all of us. We live in a world where trust is necessary but dangerous. Where the people who seem closest to us might be the ones doing the most harm. And when that happens, when someone decides to turn your life into their crime scene, the only defense you have is the truth. The documented, verifiable, impossible to deny truth. Caleb lost his innocence in this story. That easy trust he used to have, the belief that people meant what they said and wanted what they claimed to want, that's gone now, and it's not coming back. But what he gained was something deeper. The knowledge that he could survive betrayal. That he could fight back. That he could rebuild. We all face moments where we have to choose who we're going to be when everything falls apart. Are we going to accept the narrative someone else writes about us? Or are we going to fight for the truth, no matter how long it takes? Caleb chose to fight, and that choice, that refusal to give up even when the system seemed stacked against him, made all the difference. So if you're going through something right now, if someone's tried to make you the villain in a story you didn't write, remember Caleb. Remember that the truth matters. That documentation matters. That refusing to quit matters. Your story isn't over just because someone else wants it to be. I hope this story brought you a little comfort and something to hold on to. Maybe a reminder that justice, however imperfect, is still possible. That good people can survive bad situations. And that sometimes the traits we think make us weak, trust, kindness, attention to detail, are actually the things that save us in the end. If you found something meaningful in Caleb's journey today, please subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think. And drop a comment below telling me what part of the story resonated with you most. Until next time, friends, keep fighting for your truth.